In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be showing you my Howlstorm build. This is a level 50 version of the Stormwolf build, and is aimed at World Tiers 3, and is sort of a continuation of that build, showing you how it performs in Tier 3 doing Nightmare Dungeons, and we will probably have a Tier 4 version of this as well at some point. So the general strategy for this build is similar to the previous build. We're going to be using Lightning Storm as our primary means of attack. We're going to go into combat, we're going to hit with rabies, we're going to put poison all over everything, kind of round it all up. Then we're going to freeze it in place with Poison Creeper, kind of immobilizing everything. And then we're going to go to town with Lightning Storm, getting that extra damage against immobilized enemies that Storm Druids gain. And again, remember that we have the Neurotoxin passive here, which makes it so that we slow enemies that are poisoned, so that we have extra damage against them. If you have slowed on your weapon damage versus slowed, some of our key passive, for instance, Perfect Storm, does extra damage versus slowed. Or if you have, a staff which is you're using in your hands, that has damage to crowd-controlled enemies, so enemies that are slowed are going to get extra damage from you. So this is really, really helpful for this build, so when they come out of that immobilized, they're still, poisoned, so they're still technically crowd-controlled, and you're gaining bonus damage against them. So at Tier 3, there are really two problems with this build. The first problem is that you still tear through your spirit. Like any Druid build, you're going to struggle with spirit a bit, and we don't have the aspect of the Umbral yet, which is the aspect that gives you, spirit every time you crowd control an enemy. Once you have that on a ring, you will no longer have any spirit management problems with this build, but I did not get one, and I don't think you can get it very easily at lower levels of the game. So when we get to the next iteration of this build, spirit management is not going to be a problem at all, but it will be a problem for this part of the game, unless you have that ring. So there are some ways we help with our energy management, and first is the Energized Spirit Boon. This makes it so on a lucky hit, dealing damage has a 15% chance to restore 10 spirit. Lightning Storm hits lots and lots of enemies on the screen, so this should get you some spirit to be able to keep you channeling. We are still using the innate Blood Howl upgrade of Blood Howl, so every time you use this, you're going to generate 20 spirit, and this can be invaluable at this part of the game, getting that 20 spirit over and over periodically, because remember, as you kill enemies, the cooldown of this is reduced by 1 second for each enemy you kill, so you can pop this quite regularly. Additionally, I'm using the assimilation aspect on one of my rings, and what this does is it increases your dodge chance versus enemies that are affected by your damage over time, so your poisoned enemies. And when you dodge against them, you're going to gain up to 10 of your primary resource, obviously in this case is spirit. This can work with other classes as well. So obviously this is a good way to get some resources back. It's not the end all, and the aspect of the Umbral would be much better fit here because you're constantly CCing stuff and you'll get lots. You can actually get the aspect of the Umbral, by the way, from the Codex of Power if you want to get minimum roll. And even 1 on that is huge at this point in the game, so you could replace that here. But this also gives you a little bit of defense and this at the same time. And I find that my management of Spirit isn't too bad right here, but if you find you're really, really struggling, you might want to go get that from the Codex of Power. And another way you can get some extra essence until you get that particular legendary aspect is by using the Ancestral Guidance board. There are a few nodes on there that not only give you increased spirit, but also spirit back on kill. This will help keep up your spirit in the meantime until you can get that, and then you can swap boards out to something like Thunderstruck. And also, on your secondary Paragon board, you can take Ancestral Guidance, and this increases your damage by 30% after you spend 75 spirit for 5 seconds, which is great. But there are a couple nodes in this tree that basically give you extra spirit, so your max spirit's going to be raised, which means if you go into combat at full spirit, it's going to take longer to drain, but also you get spirit back on kill, and this can help fill in until you get that legendary aspect. So then the second part of this build is staying alive. When you use Lightning Storm, you're standing in place, and anytime you have to stand in place for a long period of time, it's dangerous. So we've done a couple things here to make that possible. First is by aspect of Protector. This is going to give you a barrier when you're damaging elites, and I have a really good roll on mine here, which seems to be higher than max roll for some reason. But this damage barrier is really, really good at keeping you alive, so consider having this. The next thing I'm using here is a unique called Mad Wolf's Glee. You may have noticed that we are by default in werewolf form. That is because of this unique. This isn't by no means needed for this part of the build. Probably in the Tier 4 version we will be using this. But for right now, it's not totally important, because really what I want to use this for here is the increased poison damage, the damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, which is huge. You can get like up to 20% damage reduction from them. That's a lot just from this. You get movement speed, which is great, and you gain +2 to your werewolf skills. We have a couple werewolf skills here, Rabies and Blood Howl, so that's really, really good. However, this is by no means, again, mandatory for this part of the game. You can use any chest with any sort of defensive passive on it that you want. For instance, reduce damage to crowd-controlled enemies. This is a great one that you could use on this build. Another one that I really like is the protecting aspect. This makes it so that when you're hit while not healthy, so below 80% health, A magic bubble is summoned around you up to a max of 5 seconds, and while standing in this, you're immune. You cannot be CC'd, every ground effect does nothing to you, no damage does anything to you. This is a max of 5 seconds. If you have it on Amulet, it's 7.5 seconds. That is absolutely staggering, because you can literally stand there in the middle of 100 enemies and they can't touch you, allowing you to drop your AoEs, just rain lightning storm down on them. And this has saved me so many times. It's put me in so many rooms where I'm just outnumbered 100 to 1, and I can just go to town on enemies as soon as it pops up. Nothing on the ground is messing with me. There's no CC. Really consider, if you're ever playing a caster build that needs to sit in place, like if you're playing a Sork and you need to rain Meteor or whatever it is, or maybe you're a Necromancer, consider getting this and putting it in your build. It works wonders with this build. It's really, really good. I highly recommend getting this one. And then on my feet, I have the eluding aspect, and that makes it so if you become injured while you're crowd controlling, you gain unstoppable for 4 seconds, so you get out of that crowd control effect. This can save your life. I don't have Earthen Bulwark on here, which has unstoppable on it, which, you know, you need an unstoppable thing at this point in the game. You can get away with it here on the boots, but probably later on we might actually have to switch to Earthen Bulwark. We'll have to see how it goes. But this is like your fail-safe in case you still get CC'd and your health gets low. You're going to be okay. So lastly, let's talk about how we get damage out of this build. So the first thing is the smiting aspect. I have these on my gloves. This makes it so that you have increased critical strike chance up to 20% against injured enemies. These are enemies below 30% health. And while you're healthy, you also gain up to 40% crowd control duration. This is great because enemies are going to stay slowed longer from your poison after the poison wears off. And also you're going to be able to critically strike them more often when they're weak. And they're going to be weakened from your poison a lot of the time. And this can allow you to finish them off really quickly, which is fantastic. And then on my weapon here, I have the overcharged aspect. This makes it so unlucky hit you have up to a 40% if you're doing it on a two-handed weapon. Chance when dealing lightning damage to overload the target for 3 seconds, causing any direct damage you deal to them to pulse for additional damage around surrounding enemies. This is how you really get a lot of damage into a crowd of an enemy. Once you overcharge one enemy and the lightning bolts come down and multiple lightning bolts hit that enemy, electricity just goes out everywhere and you wipe out packs of group really quickly. So I highly recommend putting this one on your weapon, and it being a two-handed weapon, a staff in this case, because you get the extra damage for crowd-controlled enemies. But this is really, really good for that. I also have the Lightning Dancers aspect. This makes it so that Lightning Storm critical strikes spawn 3 dancing bolts that seek out enemies in the area, dealing lightning damage. Again, this is another reason that critical strikes are really, really important for this build, because you want to trigger this as much as possible so these go out and just absolutely nuke enemies. And then I have the accelerating aspect, and this makes it so that when you critically strike with Lightning Storm, you're going to increase your attack speed. Increasing your attack speed reduces the animation time for your animations to complete when you do skills. And this means Lightning Storm is going to go faster, right? It's going to cast faster, which means it's going to charge up faster. You literally cannot have too much attack speed with this build, because it's going to increase the rate at which you cast Lightning Storm, which is going to make it build up faster. Whenever you start a fight, you're starting at 1 lightning bolt, and you want to get up to like 5 lightning bolts as fast as you can. We also have Overload on our Spirit Boons. This makes it so when you lucky hit, dealing lightning damage has up to 20% chance to cause the target to emit static discharge. This is more lightning damage going around. You can never really have enough lightning damage with this build. So for my glyph on my board here, I've taken Tracker, and what this does is it increases your poisoning damage effect by 33%. So when you use Rabies, it's going to last 8 seconds roughly instead of 6. And when you use Poison Creeper, the poison effect is going to last 33% longer. And you're going to deal increased damage to poison enemies. Again, remember that you should always be alternating between these two if possible, or even double stacking them. So you should always be attacking poisoned enemies, no matter whether it's a boss or a single elite or a pack of enemies. And this is really, really good because when you extend the poison duration, you also extend the slow duration, which makes it so that they're always CC'd and that you get that extra damage versus CC all the time. And also if you cast Rabies on enemies and then drag them into other enemies, the time that Rabies lasts on them is longer, so you can drag them into more enemies and round them up, which is really, really good for clear speed. So bonuses you want to look for on your gear are obviously core skill damage. You want Lightning Storm to hit as much as you can. Damage to poison enemies, poison damage, both of these are really, really good. You want damage to crowd control or damage to slowed. Both of these are really good for this build. And you want damage reduction from poisoned enemies or damage reduction from distant enemies. You're not usually getting hit by melee enemies at all with this build because you're rooting enemies and slowing them down and kind of keeping your distance from them. I also highly recommend getting boots with like at least 1 extra evade charge on it and hopefully some movement speed as well, because you want to be able to like outrun the enemies. If you slow them down with your poisons and then you move a little bit faster than normal, you can kind of always stay out of harm's way. And if you have an extra hop or 2 with your dodge, then it's even easier to do. So that wraps up my Howlstorm build. I hope you guys have seen here that you can play this build in Tier 3, and I think it's going to be viable at Tier 4 with some modifications, and you'll see what those are in the next video. If you have questions, let me know in the comments below. Stay tuned for more Diablo 4 build guides as we wrap up our World Tier 3 guides here this week and move on to World Tier 4, our final builds.